Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel Data Insights with Gaurav. This video is part of the YouTube series Pandas for Data Analysis. In this video, we'll continue working with columns in the data frame, and specifically, we'll look at how to change data types of columns. This series has some videos around how can we load data to the data frame. Then we continued towards data cleaning, where we tried to add a few columns to the data frame, remove existing columns, and also try to see how can we update columns conditionally and unconditionally. If you haven't watched these videos, I encourage you to go and watch these videos to have better understanding around how can we work with pandas data frames. I leave the link to all these videos in the I button at the top. Right. So let's continue with our demo for this video, where we'll try to see how can we change data types of the columns. But before that, we need to understand what are the different data types supported by pandas. So we go to the official documentation here. You can see that it supports date time, which is basically useful for storing date and time information along with time zone information if required. Category data type helps you store categorical data. We'll look at categorical data in the upcoming videos. Period helps you store period data. Sparse data type helps you store sparse data if you have in your data frame column. Interval will help you store the interval data. Integer will help you store whole numbers, integer data. Float will help you store floating point values or decimal values. String will help you store string data. And Boolean will help you store Boolean data, which is true and false, right? And object data type will help you store any Python object, right? So this is kind of a generic object in pandas, right? And these are specific objects, specific data types in pandas, right? So these are the list of data types that are available in pandas, and we'll try to see how can we convert one data type into another, right? So the method for you doing that is as type method. Okay, this method helps you convert columns to the desired data types, right? So if you have been following along with me, you would know that I had created a data frame backup when in the earlier video when we dropped a few columns, right? So I wanted those columns back. So I had created a backup there, which looked something like this. So it has all the columns before I removed or dropped the columns, right? So this backup, I'll just restore it back to our data frame, right? And then we'll try to convert, right? So now this data frame already has columns in the respective data types. Like for example, order date is already in timestamp, right? But I want to show you how can we do that, right? So let's convert it to the generic type, which is object. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying df.asType. So I'm converting all the columns in the data frame to a generic type, which is object. And then we'll try to see how can we convert one column to respective data type, another column to another respective data type, right? So let's try to do that. So let me run this. So now, and here what I'm doing here is I'm calling this function called info. What this function does is actually it gives you information around the column names and their respective data types. So here, because I used df.asType object, my entire data frame, right? All the columns are of data type object, right? Which is a generic data type, right? So now with that in mind, where we have a data frame with all the columns, the data is still intact, but the data type of all the columns is object, right? Let's try to see how can we convert it to a respective data type. So let's say I want to convert this total price, which has at floating point values, right, to a float data type. So how can we do that? Is basically we can call on this particular series, right? So if you've been following along, you would know that this particular df total price will return me the series, right? Which means it will return this entire column, right? So what I'm doing is I'm saying convert this to data type float, right? Float 64 is basically way of saying that I want to convert it to a float, right? So I can use capital F here, right, to convert it to float, right? So now let's try to do this and let's try to see what happens to the data, right? And right now it's 99.9, 99.95 and all that, right? Let's try to run this. So now you can see that the data has not changed, but the data type is now float, right? It's no longer object. Let's try to look at df.info, right? And confirm that earlier it was what? Earlier it was object here, right? Now let's try to see what we have here, right? So now you can see that it has indeed be converted into floating point data type, right? Now let's say I don't like this and I want to convert the total price to an integer value, right? So what I can simply do is I can again say as type, and I can try to pass on what int 64, right? So I'm trying to convert it to an integer value, and let's see what happens, right? So now what has happened is you can see that it has been converted to int 64, right? And if I just comment this off and I look at the total price, you can see that it has been it was 99.9, it has been truncated to 99, right? Which means I have lost some data here, right? Which is not something that you would want to do when you are doing some data analysis, right? You want to keep it as close as possible. So ideally I would want it to be 100 because it's closer to 100 and not 99, right? So then what I can do is, before converting to an integer, right, I can say round it off, right? So round is a function that will help you round this data off, right? So let's try to run and see what happens, right? So let me just run the entire data frame again. Okay, so now you can see that it has been rounded to the closest value, right? So 99.99 is 90 is converted to 100, right? Now when I convert it to 64, right, I'll not lose any data, right? So which means I'll not lose any data, right? So this is, it's your choice how you want to do it. If you're okay with getting some, getting this to a lower bound, then you can use without round. Otherwise, generally we'll try to keep it as close as possible, so we'll use the round function, right? So this is what I've done. I've converted this particular column, which was in object type earlier, to floating point, and then I converted it to an integer value, right? So now if I do a dot info on the data frame, that column will now be an int 64, right? Which means it will store integer values, right? So let's try to look at how can we convert to a date time, right? So now order date column is an object data type, and we know that it stores some dates, right? So it is good to have it in a date time data type, right? So let's try to convert that. So there again, there are two ways. Either you could follow as type method, where you can say that pass the date time 64ns, right? Which means you're saying that convert it to a date time value. Or you can use a utility function from pandas, which is to date time, where you can say that convert this particular column to a date time, right? So it's your choice how you want to do it. You can stick with the as type method, or if you want, you can use this to date time utility method, right? So let's try to run this. So now you can see that order date is no longer object, but it's now date time 64, right? So now it's date time. What advantage that we have are above about converting it to a date time is this, right? Now what you can do is, now you can use a DT, right? So we have already discussed accessors. If you remember, we have discussed what is a string accessor. So similarly, you have something called as DT accessor, which helps you work around dates, right? And date time values. So what we can do is, now what I'm doing here is I'm extracting date. So now I know what do I have in the date column, right? This column, I have some year, some month, some date, hours, minutes, and seconds, right? If I want, let's say I want to extract this. So if it is in object, I'll not be able to extract it as easy as this, right? So that is why I converted this order date to date time data type, and then I can use this .dt accessor. So now, because it's a date time data type, I can use this dt accessor over it and then extract whatever I want to, right? So in this case, I'm extracting a date, I'm extracting the time component, I'm extracting year, month, day, hour, minute, seconds, microseconds, and then I'm also extracting the day name, right? Whether it's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever that day is, right? And what day of the year is. So it's, let's say 1st January 21, so it'll be first day, right? Then 2nd January will be second day, right? And I'm just projecting these columns here, right? So let's try to run this and see what happens, right? So you can see that order date, which is of date time data type, you can extract date, you can extract time, year, month, and all these information because with the use of DT accessor. And this DT accessor is only applicable on date time data type series, right? So if you had not converted this, you would not have this, you know, this way of converting or getting the information, right? So it's very useful when you want to convert it to the respective type. You have to use as type method, and then you can use these accessors on datetime objects, right? Similarly, now date time, if you observe, right, it's year, month, and day, right? Let's say I don't like this and I want to say I want to convert it into day, month, and year format, right? Followed by hours, minutes, and seconds. So what you can do is, again, you can use the DT accessor, and from that you can use a function called str time. So string from time, where you will convert this to the respective format that you want, right? So let's try to look at this, right? So now you can see that it has been now converted into the respective format, right? So it's now, earlier it was year, month, and date, right? Now it's DD, MM, and YYYY, right? So now that's the format that is there. Now let's try to see what is the data type of this, right? So now let's try to see what the data type is. So if I say dot D type over this, right, over this particular series, right? So I can see that it's of data type object. O means object, or if you don't like this, right, what you can do is you can say dot info, right? You can say dot info. So if I run this, now I can see that your newly added column, then what was the name of the column? So it was order date formatted, right? So when you can see order date formatted here, right, you can see it's again object. Last but not the least, let's see how to convert a date time column to a period, right? So what you can do is, I want to extract the period from it. So what is period is again a data type, right? So you can use a date accessor and say to period, and then you can specify the frequency. So now let's say I want to extract the month, right? So M is for month, and if I project this, right, you can see that it has extracted period, month, right? So it's again 1st of January, right? 2nd of January, 3rd of January. So it's January, right? January 2022. If I say D, so it will be day wise. So again, there'll be no, so it will be 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, right? If I say yearly, let's say, right? So the period will be 2022, right? If I say quarterly, Q is for quarter, right? So again, it will be quarter one, quarter one, quarter one, right? So that's how you can convert a date time, or you can extract period from a date time object by using DT accessor and to period method, right? So that's it for this video. If you like the content, consider subscribing to my channel. Subscribing is free and it helps me continue creating quality content for you. Additionally, if you found this video useful, please give it a thumbs up and hit the like button. It will help me reach a wider audience who is interested in pandas and data analysis. And also, it will help me create a vibrant community around this channel so that we can discuss a lot of concepts and grow this channel and grow our data analysis skills, right? So thank you for watching. See you around. Until next time, bye-bye.